My name is Jim Bensley, and I'm the Interim Director of NMC's International Affairs Forum. We're pleased to have you with us this evening as we address the future of U.S.-China relations with Wall Street Journal Senior China Correspondent, Ms. Lingling Wei. I want to welcome all of our IF members, first-time guests, and local high school and college students. For more information on future IF programs or to become a member yourself, please visit our website at tciaf.com. During tonight's conversation, if you want to ask a question, please submit them via the chat feature at the bottom of your page. Our moderator tonight is Mr. Nathan Payne. He's the executive editor of the Traverse City Record Eagle. He serves as regional editor for CNHI newspaper group, leading national investigations and overseeing the company's Texas newspaper group. In 2018 and 19, Nathan served as a prestigious Abrams Nieman Fellow for local investigative journalism at Harvard University. Welcome, Nathan, and welcome, Lingling.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for inviting me to moderate tonight's event, and welcome, Lingling. For those of you who haven't read back, Lingling Wei is a senior China correspondent for the Wall Street Journal and co-author of the book Superpower Showdown. And she started her career with the journal in covering real estate in New York City. So welcome, Lingling.
Thank you, Nate. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I think it'd be great to start off tonight with, can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey? What brought you both to one of the most prestigious US news outlets, but also what brought you to journalism, and particularly US-based journalism?
Sure, Nate. How much time do we have? Anyway, I'll try to be brief here. It's been quite a long journey. It has been a long journey for me to, get here in the United States to learn about journalism, becoming a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and really realized my dream job in 2011. That's when the journal sent me back to China to cover China for the journal. It was many years in the making for that part of the journey. And now I'm back in the US. I relocated back mid last year because the Chinese government expelled a bunch of American journalists working in China for American media outlets, part of this tit for tat expulsions after Washington kept a number of Chinese journalists working in the US. So I've been back for almost a year now. This is the start. Still in the process of starting another journey. I continue to write about China, albeit from New York these days. So how did I get into journalism? It was really, that's what my mom always wanted to do, and she didn't get a chance. She became a military doctor. And she just said, why don't you study journalism, become a journalist? And I was basically like, oh, all right. So that's basically how I got into journalism. But as you know, in China, the system is very different from the US. There's no freedom of press. Everything is controlled, especially the media is very tightly controlled by the government. So I really started to learn about what journalists do, what journalism really means, holding power accountable, holding the big corporations accountable. I really learned about that concept when I was in my senior year in college. Back then, it was really an era of greater openness of China to the outside world. We had a lot of American scholars teaching in my university, Fulbright scholars, From them, we learned about Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, the whole expose of the Watergate scandal. Learned about even the Wall Street Journal's style of writing, starting with a small anecdote and trying to tell a bigger story. So I just got really fascinated by what American journalists do, and just really there's such a huge admiration for the profession. So I just told myself I really wanted to go to America and be a real journalist, not one that would have been defined by the government. So I was very lucky. After graduation, I worked for a couple of years for a state-owned English language newspaper. And, while I was working, I, took the exams and all that, applied for a bunch of universities in the US, and, got a scholarship to go to NYU. That's really how I started my American part of the journey. One after another, I got hired by the journal in 2010, late 2009 and early 2010, I think. It was in the midst of the housing crisis, because previously I had covered housing for Dow Jones Newswires and won a bunch of awards for my housing coverage. So the journal hired me to cover commercial real estate at the time, which was the next huge job, right, in terms of the real estate market. So it was really I was so it was like my dream come true. I mean, being able to write for the Wall Street Journal, one of the best newspapers in the whole world. I remember the day when I got the call from the journal editor. Oh, you got hired. Immediately told my family in China, and they were so thrilled for me. I mean, they knew, like, the Wall Street Journal, it's like a very pinnacle of journalism. So I remember there were like twice my parents invited friends over. And just had the huge family banquet, like really, tons of people over, having drinks and big meals. There were twice in my life my parents did that. Once was at my wedding, and the second time was when I was hired by the Wall Street Journal. So it was a huge event. And then I covered real estate for the journal for a couple of years, and then this golden opportunity came along, which was covering China, Chinese economy for the journal. I immediately raised my hand. That's really the job I had always wanted, which was going back to China, writing about the change in my homeland and for a global audience. So my dream came true in early 2011. And that was a time of, speaking of a US-China relationship, I always thought, for the longest time, people like me benefited so much from a close relationship, right? I was able to, I grew up in China. I was able to come to the US to study and stayed to work, and then went back to China to write for American newspaper, right? Back then I really thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so it's pretty interesting. I mean, I know, my story is just such a small story, but in a way, it kind of shows how it really, the changes in the relationship really affects individuals, right? So then everything fell apart a couple of years ago, started to fall apart, the trade war between Washington and China under the Trump administration. Things just got worse and worse and worse. And early last year, both governments started to kick out journalists. And I, along with my colleagues and other, competitors, became basically the collateral damage. So that's how I ended up being back in New York. So that's
Was
basically the journey.
I'm curious how so you had written for a state-owned newspaper and then you went back writing for a US newspaper. What was your experience and the difference in truth telling and reporting between the two?
That's a great question. Obviously, the difference is immense. When you work for a state-owned newspaper, you're only a journalist to the extent the government allows you to be. So, a lot of things are off limits. When you write for the Wall Street Journal, nothing really is off limits. The only main standard is truth, right? Trying to find out exactly what's happened and tell the truth, inform the public, hold the powerful accountable. There's just really no restrictions in terms of what you can write. You can write about anything, everything, as long as it's meaningful and it's based on facts. So that's really the main difference. Now, obviously, because my training was really the basic training was with state media outlet, right? So it took me a while to really realize what my role should be. I mean, because once you grew up in a system that was so different, it kind of had this habit. It's potentially censoring yourself. Oh, can I really write about that? And then you realize, of course I can write about it. In fact, that's my job. I should write about it, right? So it took me a while, but not too long. It's very easy to make this adjustment. I would say the harder part would be going the opposite direction. If you working for a free press and trying to see what it's like working for a more controlled media environment, that would be much harder.
Yeah, because that's like, in US journalism, speaking truth to power and asking questions regardless, with no fear of, real reprisals other than someone just not talking to you or
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yelling at you, threatening a lawsuit.
yeah, I mean, that seems pretty tame in comparison. But so you made this round trip and then as you were sent away from the country, were there others who were like you who were expats back working for Western media companies who were then sent away?
I mean, you mean people with similar background?
Yeah,
My background?
Yeah, who had to leave their families and would have been, had that choice between their career and their family or their career in their country.
Sure. It certainly has been very challenging for all of us, and different reporter who went through this experience certainly had very different circumstances. Mine was a bit unique because I did have to leave my family behind because that's where I grew up, so I remember that night in March when it was really late at night, just like every other day, I just finished the last round of social media, surfing, make sure didn't miss anything and all that. And this alert just came up on my screen that, I think it was a story, someone forwarded me this story from Bloomberg, essentially said in a very roundabout way, the Chinese government announced the decision to expel American journalists. And I just felt really numb at that very moment. And, the first thing that really hit me was, holy shit, means, I can't stay here and I have to leave my parents. And then while I was really, just in a state of shock, I got a very nice message from one of my competitors. And he said, but all the people, you're getting hit the hardest, because they know that I have family there. So it was really, wow, that experience was just so frightening. You felt like so hopeless and helpless, and just really hard. I just, like nothing. We always knew that covering China, it had a lot of risks, right? Give what you just said, but we never really expected, things like that to happen, like just overnight. So was really quite an experience, and of course, I was very fearful. I was fearful for my family and the possibility of not being back to China ever again. So yeah, I thought about quitting actually, if that's a way for me to remain in China and taking care of my aging parents. But it was really, what really made me not quit was the support from my mom and my dad. And they were just like, no, you can't, don't give up. They know how much I love what I do. And just they also just really felt it was very unfair, what authorities had done. And just it's just that even if you quit, you got to stay in China, you wouldn't be happy for the rest of your life, and we do not want that. So anyway, so it really thanks to my parents, the support from them, that I stayed on and packed up my life and came back to the US. And I have to say, I'm very, very lucky in all things considered. I got to come back to a land of freedom. What's so bad about that? There's nothing bad about that. And obviously, the entire Wall Street Journal, it's very hard for us to cover China now. We've got so few people on the ground in China these days. But we just keep plugging away, trying different ways to tackle this very complex China story as much as we can.
That's I feel like the common thread between journalism parents worldwide is people who tend to raise journalists also want their kids to do it because they know it's intertwined with their, inextricably intertwined with their personality. And so how long did they give you to leave? What was the
So they did give me some extra time because it was in the midst of pandemic.
Okay.
Was recovering from pneumonia, and my dad was in lockdown in another city, and my husband also was in a different city, and my son was just being homeschooled for the second month, because of the pandemic. So there was no way for me to get ready, in 10 days. So I basically asked for the government. I said, I don't need any special treatment. Just allow me to take advantage of the new regulation that just came out from the Chinese government. Basically, it says that if your visa for foreigners, if your visa expires, it automatically would renew for 2 months. So just allow me to take advantage of that policy. I don't even need you to do anything special for me. And in fact, my visa wouldn't have expired until September, but they wanted me out much sooner than that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so so I was lucky. They agreed. They gave me 2 extra months. Wow. So I left China in May.
Okay. So you left China in the middle of the pandemic and arrived in the US in the middle of the pandemic, and then had to resettle and get to work, I imagine.
The first words people said to me when I landed at JFK, it was "Welcome home." My tears, I just couldn't hold it any longer. I was going through the customs line, right? And the official, I remember the African American official, customs officer, he took a look at my visa. He didn't know any of my stories, of course. But it's a blue passport, it's American passport, right? And he just looked at it and smiled at me, "Welcome home." I just so just I just felt so, those two very simple words just warmed my heart.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's got to be a comfort just to hear that.
Yeah, it's huge comfort because the last day I was in Beijing at the Shanghai airport, Shanghai International Airport. Before I was about to board the plane back to New York, I was actually escorted by a couple of security guards to the gate.
Wow. Wow. So I guess let's pivot to the beat and to the job. Sorry, I'm really interested in, I'm kind of
No,
nerdy
not at
about
all.
journalism coming to be stories. So can you tell us my first question is the question that I would ask any journalist. What is happening between US and China in the relationship that people in the US aren't paying enough attention to? What is the storyline that we're overlooking or not reading enough about?
I think nowadays it's also just because the challenges all American news outlets have, like limited number of reporters in China. And from my perspective, I would have loved to do more reporting, like what really the Chinese people are doing, are thinking. So that's really, I felt like, I was kicking myself every day for not being able to do that, at least for the foreseeable future. So there is this idea, at least in some circles of the US, that somehow you can easily separate the Chinese government from the Chinese people, the Chinese public, right? During the Trump years, former Secretary of State Pompeo, almost on a daily basis in the final days of administration, would single out the Communist Party of China, CCP, right? Oh, you guys are evil. You're doing all that, bad things. Just made it very clear that he was after, all his criticism was directed at the government, at the party. But it's really difficult for the Chinese people to separate the government from them, from the lives. It's probably also partly because of years and years of propaganda. As we said earlier, the media in China is very much controlled by the state. So oftentimes you only have one voice in the Chinese society, which is the party's voice. So, it's been very effective. So people really identify with the government, with the people. And, I remember, throughout the pandemic, especially when China started to come out of the pandemic, there was really a genuine support for the top leadership from the Chinese public. And especially after they saw how the US were basically really scrambling, right, to keep things under control. So, the sense of pride and growing confidence is unmistaken. So I think it's just really difficult, not just for ordinary Americans, but also for policymakers in Washington. They think, oh, we can do this. We can make it very clear. We're not against China. We're not against Chinese people. We're only against the government, the party. But that doesn't work. For the Chinese, they're all, the same. The Communist Party is China. You don't understand the Chinese Communist Party. You don't understand China. So I think that is a common mistake some people have made.
That makes sense. I mean, in the US, we don't necessarily identify ourselves that closely with the government. And that makes sense. So I guess talking about that rhetoric during the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, has anything really changed? It seems like, a lot of the same sort of protectionist postures toward supply chain have at least continued into the Biden administration. Maybe the public rhetoric isn't quite as contentious, but what's your perception of the before and after that's happening now?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The China policy, there has been a continuation of Trump era policy when it comes to China. You really haven't seen the administration now, trying anything to roll back the tariffs or relax restrictions on export control aimed at China. And, at the same time, when it comes to some geopolitical and issues about values and human rights, the current administration has stepped up pressure on Beijing. So you really haven't seen much of an improvement in the relationship. Same with China. I mean, China hasn't taken any steps either to try to, break the ice or ease the tensions, right? It's partly because for both sides, the room for compromise is quite limited, at least for the time being. Next year is very crucial for the Chinese leadership because late next year, once in a decade leadership transition, and President Xi Jinping is widely expected to continue his reign over China, the third term. Same here in the US, right? Midterm, right? Election also for next year. So both parties don't want to be seen as weak, right? As caving in to China. The biggest adversary the US has for the near future, and same for the Chinese. They felt like they're equal to the Americans now, can't be bossed around anymore. So the political constraints on both sides really help explain why hasn't been a noticeable improvement in the relationship, and probably will stay this way for the near future.
In that supply chain discussion, it seems like the US realized some really significant vulnerabilities in supply chain as the pandemic hit and halted supplies of a lot of things, a lot of products and raw materials. So do you foresee the US trying to continue repatriating some, some things viewed as national security concerns, or do you think we'll go back to some sort of, status quo normal-ish in terms of Pacific trade?
Sure. I mean, the supply chain definitely is a huge issue for countries all over the world. The pandemic really is a wake-up call that if you rely on one country too much, you will be very vulnerable if things like the pandemic were to happen again. So every country is trying to really figure out ways to secure, right, their supply chains. From China's perspective, they're trying to upgrade their manufacturing capabilities by using big data, AI, and other technologies, and also trying to make the world more reliant on China. For Washington, I mean, the Biden administration obviously, is trying something generations of U.S. governments haven't done before, which is have, big government kind of sponsored or advocated industrial policy, right? Spend a lot of money. The idea is to, spend a lot of money on key technologies and like AI and other chips and other major crucial sectors. The idea to basically secure America's leading position in terms of technology and manufacturing on the other sectors. So I do think of course that's very debatable, right? Whether or not industrial policy like that would work for America, which traditionally has prided itself on letting market forces, right, dictate things. It's definitely a question whether or not they will have a policy, given the disagreement between both parties over this, and among academics and all sorts of market practitioners. And on the other issue about trying to get American companies to move back to the US, Nate, you probably would be better judge of how that initiative has panned out so far than I am, because the way market economy works is not, they don't care what the government wants you to do. It's really based on costs, right? Market opportunities. There are some firms moving their operations out of China, but that doesn't mean they have all come back to the US, right? They moved to other low-cost nations like in Southeast Asia, So I think it's not, it's definitely a very challenging question for the government. On one hand, you do want to create jobs, especially for middle class, blue collar workers and middle class American families. How do you do that? So that's definitely a key issue.
I understand China has declared, that it intends to target and dominate specific sectors of the tech industry. How is that interplay being received, and what's the broader strategy in doing that?
Sure. China's development model is one driven by government policy. So it's a very state-led development model. So that really helps explain how they're going about trying to be the technological superpower. For years, the government has spent billions of dollars, basically poured, different, state firms, domestic firms, universities, research labs with a lot of money, trying to improve the R&D capabilities. In some cases, that is successful. In other cases, no matter how much money you spend, China's still lagging, especially in the area of semiconductors. That really helps explain why China really wants US to relax restrictions on the sale of American chips to Chinese companies like Huawei, right? And a bunch of other companies. Because, in certain ways, it's really interesting whenever I talk to Chinese officials, they would tell us, the industrial policy, at least, in industrial policy of the past, really did more harm to China's own economy than to the rest of the world, despite the complaints from the Americans. Why would people think that way? It was because it's so wasteful, right? The government decides which sector to invest in. How do you think the government would know better than private businesses and entrepreneurs? So that has led to tremendous waste, and also given rise to ever rising debt piles in China's economy. So really, it's the overcapacity issue, to this day still very severe, and the distortion in the market. Those are all structural problems that sit at the core of a state-led development model. So going forward, the Chinese, they're smart. They definitely have realized the problems, but they also, it's very hard for them to switch gear to enhance the role of market forces in the economy, because that would require even changes in the political arena. For example, the party needs to lessen control over the country. So that really, conflicts with the need to make structural changes in the economy. So going forward, they're trying to, make the industrial policy more efficient, potentially invite in more private enterprises to have a say in what projects should be sponsored or promoted, how money should be spent, that sort of thing. But overall, it's really not much change in how China runs the economy. It's still very much state intervention, state control.
So in that debt pileup that they've got, how does that interplay with the Belt and Road project and policy? And I saw Joe Biden has come out and basically proposed a competitor. What's the, can China continue that type of international strategic expansion with the debt situation domestically?
That's a very good question. The Belt and Road Initiative, for sure, is very important for the Chinese leadership, and it's also hugely complicated. China is facing a bunch of restraints in terms of being more ambitious with, where they want to go and how they want to spend. The debt restraints definitely is one. And also the backfire, some of the loans they made many years earlier kind of backfired this, and this whole debt trap narrative also, is hurting China's reputation and credibility, in the rest of the world. So what Beijing has been doing is they are readjusting the policy. They're going to continue Belt and Road and continue to try to lend to developing countries, to gain greater say in global affairs, but they will try to lend smarter. So they, doesn't really have the unlimited resources to spend, however they want. And you just have to be smarter and introduce more market disciplines. Chinese lenders, in the past, in China was a newcomer to development finance, right? The US and other countries, Japan, other countries have been in this arena for many, many decades. And China was relatively new, really, for the past 10 years or so. They made a ton of mistakes. Chinese officials who also tell you this as well. They didn't do much due diligence before they make loans. They never did any risk assessment when they made those loans. But now they're trying to be more commercially oriented, more circumspect in terms of who to lend to. And obviously geopolitical concerns, strategic areas, strategic resources, obviously still, a key for the leadership in terms of deciding which countries to lend to, what projects to lend to. And another interesting thing to watch really is this whole green finance. China obviously has signed up to the global initiative, right? To fight climate change and trying to improve environment globally. So they have been promoting, trying to finance more green projects, clean energy types of projects. So over the past couple of years, we have seen a gradual downward trend in Chinese lending overseas, but there are the few areas where there actually have been an uptick in Chinese lending is those green energy, clean energy related sectors.
Okay. We're going to jump over. I think we've hit our time to start taking some questions from the audience. And from Michael, have your family members in China suffered any difficulties because of being an American reporter?
Knock on wood, physically, no. But, just there obviously, because right now the nationalistic sentiment is running really high in China these days. So they would really target American journalists, especially American journalists of Chinese descent, for things they don't like. For example, late last year, I did a story about how the government is exerting more control over the private sector. That story was very popular, on our website, and obviously people in China, some of them also read the story, and then because obviously the story was the story really ran counter to the government's official line that we're market economy, we're continuing to liberalize the economy. So there are just some hit pieces about me personally on that went viral in China's social media, and just calling my name, right? Basically saying, oh, she's such a traitor, she's a China-born journalist, now totally brainwashed by the Americans. And that story, that article just went viral on WeChat and some other forms of social media. And obviously my parents saw the article, and they are very strong, and they knew what I'm doing, and it's, so they kept telling me, don't worry about us, just as long as you just follow your dreams, follow your heart, be honest to yourself, there's nothing you should worry about us. But it was hard. It was really hard. I mean, they're in their 70s, and only to wake up on one day and see those vile comments about their daughter for doing her job. It was I know it was hard on them, but other than that, it was okay. It was okay for them.
That seems to be a theme in autocracies, seems to be attacking journalists with counter counter narratives when they tell truths. I was curious earlier, this is from me, but um, it, are your parents able to access your journalism?
No, no.
No.
They don't really speak English or read in English, and Wall Street Journal website has been blocked in China for many years now, along with the websites of the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg. I don't quite remember, but quite a few of our us being blocked for quite a long time.
So it's really inaccessible. Um, what
Right.
from Emma, what problems have you run into as a journalist when covering Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang?
Um, I really haven't covered that topic at all because my beat is about China's economy and economic policy. So my colleagues, definitely, there are quite a few colleagues of mine who really have taken a lot of risks covering this hugely important topic.
Stephen asks, how likely is a war over Taiwan, and what would be the risk and reward assessment by China?
Well, Taiwan definitely is emerging as the, one of the most pressing challenges for both the U.S. and China these days. During the Trump era was really trade, right? The trade war was the most pressing. Now, I personally think has been replaced by issues involving Taiwan. There's definitely no question that China considers Taiwan part of China, and the reunification is bound to happen from the Chinese perspective. And now U.S. is committed to defending Taiwan in the event of invasion. So it's definitely hugely important area, especially given that most recently, the Chinese accused the American administration of just really trying moving closer to the red line, right? Upgrading the relationships with the Taiwan government, and the U.S. government accused the Chinese of stepping up too much pressure, military pressure on Taiwan. So it's just like this vicious circle, like getting, hardly a week goes by without we see another headline of some sort of, potential problems across the street. So it's really very concerning, I think. But are we talking about imminent war, or even kind of conflict, real gunfight? Knock on wood, and hopefully not. But right now the problem really is both sides don't have a mechanism by which they talk, right? So in case of emergency, in the past, they had a mechanism in place where the Chinese could just call up their counterpart in America and vice versa. Right now, they're hardly talking. So this is very concerning. It would, but nobody also is in a hurry to rebuild this kind of system, because right now is still, for America's China bashing in Beijing, is America bashing, is still pretty toxic environment.
So you don't foresee a Biden presidential visit in the way we saw with in the earlier Trump years?
No, I don't see that. Actually, there were people who lobbied for earlier Biden Xi summit, would be similar to the Mar-a-Lago summit during the Trump era. Never went too far at all. Yeah.
That's interesting. So I I definitely want to jump back real quickly to the coronavirus pandemic, because I think none of us have had enough of that, I guess. It's only dominated the news cycle for a year and a half.
Yeah.
But what you know, it appears, what should we take as credible in terms of the information coming out of China, and why has China been so so clamped down on information about the origins of the virus, or and of the spread, and how it's been handled? What's your take on the information flow and the truths that we're seeing, or what is the truth?
Right. Initially, there's definitely a certain amount of cover up especially by the local government in China, Wuhan. My colleague Jeremy and I did a big leader, page one story just about that. The local officials in Wuhan started to notice problems as early as I think late November or early December, right? And China had its version of the CDC, right? Emergency report system, in place, very advanced, but nobody actually used it to report the what's happening on the ground. So at least a whole month was wasted. They could have acted much sooner. They could have alerted the general public much sooner, at least 1 month sooner, but it didn't, because the default position for those officials was cover up. Right? They didn't want to take the responsibilities. They thought, oh, this was probably just flu, just hide it, until they couldn't hide it anymore. Our reporting shows that the head of China CDC, he called the head of the US CDC and basically had like cried when they were having the conversation. Just showed how severe the whole situation had become. So and gradually, as China got grip over the situation, and the sense, just become increasingly hubristic, right? So they felt like so by only investigating the origins of the pandemic in China, they felt like it was attack on the party leadership. It was attack on China. Basically, the assumption was you're guilty. That's why we needed to investigate you. So that really helped explain why China has been so reluctant to have independent investigators in China and doing independent investigations. So it just becoming a hugely political issue. It was supposed to be science-based finding trips, right? But because how that the China virus and all the criticisms against China, and also how China's own incentives not to show weakness and from the whole world, it just becomes so politicized. Who knows when are we going to find out the truth, if ever?
Yeah, that it seems like it's always the cover up that ends up being the centerpiece. So Jack asks, in the past few years, the media and both the U.S. administrations have characterized the relationship between China and the U.S. as if it's a new Cold War. How do the Chinese people who feel about that? isn't there a way to achieve a working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's legitimate interests?
That's a great question. Is there a way? um, there definitely right now it's just so everybody both parties so stuck in their own way of thinking, and given the constraints we talked about earlier, it's very hard to see a path way forward right now. um, you know uh, and there's still many areas both countries can cooperate, right? Climate change is one, and commercial relationship, there's still so many American companies that want to do business in China and vice versa. However, it just really difficult to have a stable relationship when you're so competitive in almost every way. And hawks in both sides, it seems like, have taken the upper hand. Um, Not seeing anything moving in a positive direction right now. But let's see, I mean, another question is, what is the Biden administration's China policy really? Until the administration really figures it out, I don't think we're going to see any kind of overture from either side.
Okay. We've got, I think, time for maybe one more. So Brad asks, how many new jobs need to be created in China each year to keep low unemployment, to keep social unrest low? And how does that tie to the impact caused by Western nations moving manufacturing out of China?
That's a great question. If my memory serves me right, it should be the number new jobs should be around 40 million every year. So it's quite a big number for sure. That's a very good question, because the need to create jobs and keep jobs is one reason why China doesn't want an exodus of foreign companies out of China. And that's not happening either. I mean, you do see, despite the much strained relationship, according to most recent surveys, most American companies still want to keep expanding in China. And it also depends on sectors. Some sectors, especially technology, right? Because of the retaliations and counter retaliations, it's really they get stuck in the middle. They're probably the worst hit sector. So you do see some technology companies reconfiguring their supply chains, trying to separate their China operations from the rest of their operations. You see things happening there. But in other sectors like consumer products, American consumer goods producers, and energy companies, agriculture firms, they're doing very well in China. Sales has been great. So that just and the government, the Chinese government, also have this strong incentive to keep companies in China. So we really haven't seen a huge amount of job loss because of the bad relationship.
And actually, we've got time for one more from Jamshid. Asks, what do you think about the social credit system and the role of artificial intelligence in collecting and analyzing this data?
Right. I'm actually working a big story about that. And the control over data in China, definitely, the government wants greater visibility into data collected by private sector firms. The social credit system really was launched in 2014. So the implementation of that whole social credit system actually has been quite slow because of the so many different government agencies are involved. So implementation has been slow, and that system really is about centralizing data from government entities. So so far it hasn't involved collecting data from private sector firms. So as far as I know, it has achieved some of the goals that were initially set by authorities when it was launched. For example, linking all different government database together, right? So if you go search my name, it could come up with some basic information about me, and potentially there could also be a score. I never used that when I was in China, so I really don't know, and I don't know anyone who actually have used that. So the actual impact on people's behavior and the government ability to surveil its public is still very much in question.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us and speaking with us. I think it's been enlightening, and I appreciate you taking on the questions. I think there are so many really important issues at play here. It's wonderful to have someone who's so in the mix and on the ground, in the issues, talking to us about it.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
Great. Lingling, Nathan, thank you both for an engaging conversation on a topic that's always very, very interesting. So we invite you all to join us again on June 13th or 17th, I'm sorry, when we host the World Affairs Council of America's CEO, Mr. Bill Clifford, for our annual foreign policy mashup, partisanship, civics, and let's underscore that one, and meeting global challenges. And thanks again to all of our IF members and to those of you who may not yet be members, but still offered your financial support for this program. That crucial support, of course, helps provide local high school and college students free access to our excellent array of world-renowned speakers. So good night and enjoy the warm northern Michigan weather. Thank you very much.